Peyton Blake slammed the motel room door shut behind her, her heart racing like she'd just outrun a stampede, because in some ways she had. She yanked off her oversized sunglasses and stared at her reflection in the cracked mirror above the sink. The face staring back looked nothing like the woman on every billboard in Los Angeles. Her caramel blonde hair was tucked under a hoodie, mascara smudged under her eyes, and her lips, usually glossed to perfection, were chapped. She was invisible here, and that was exactly the point. This place smelled like pine sol and cigarette smoke, but it was a hell of a lot safer than the chaos she'd left behind. Her manager had betrayed her, her fiancé had sold a story to the tabloids, and now cameras were camped outside her house. The kind of betrayal that made even a Hollywood starlet want to disappear off the face of the earth. Peyton dropped her duffel bag on the stained mattress and let herself breathe. No paparazzi, no fake smiles, no lies, just silence. A knock echoed from the other side of the thin wall. As she froze, another knock, this time followed by a voice deep, male, and definitely irritated. "Hey, sorry to bother you. Your car's blocking my spot." She peeked through the blinds. A tall guy stood in the parking lot, wearing a faded gray t-shirt and jeans. He held a little girl on his hip, who was fiddling with his collar and staring at the world like it owed her answers. Peyton opened the door a crack. "Sorry, I didn't realize it parked wrong. I'll move it." The guy gave her a once-over, eyes lingering on her face like he recognized her but couldn't place it. "It's fine. Just figured I'd ask before my daughter here starts hollering." "I don't holler," the girl said matter-of-factly, resting her cheek on his shoulder. Peyton cracked a smile. "She's adorable." "She's fierce," he said, shifting the little girl higher. "Name's Theo. That's my daughter Fallon." Fallon gave a small wave with her chubby fingers. Peyton hesitated, then said, "I'm Paige." It was the first name that popped into her head. No way was she using her real one. Theo didn't question it, he just nodded. "Nice to meet you, Paige." She watched him carry Fallon back toward the room 2 doors down, and something about the way he held her protective, patient made her chest tighten. He had that look of a man who'd been through hell but was still standing. She didn't plan to talk to him again. She just wanted to hide. But that changed the next morning. Peyton had barely taken a bite of her vending machine muffin when a knock came again. She sighed and opened the door. Theo stood there looking sheepish. "Sorry, I know we just met, but Fallon's sick. I think it's a fever. I don't have anyone to watch her, and I can't miss my shift again. I wouldn't ask if I had another option." Peyton blinked. "You want me to babysit?" "I know it's a lot, but you seem normal, and Fallon liked you." She stared at him, stunned. He didn't know who she was. He didn't see red carpets or magazine covers. He just saw a woman in a hoodie who happened to be next door. And he trusted her. She looked past him at the little girl, curled up in his arms, flushed and sniffling. "Yeah, hey," Peyton said. "I'll help." Theo let out a breath of relief. "I'll owe you, big time." That was how it started. One afternoon turned into 2, then 3. Peyton sat with Fallon, read her books, made her soup, and held her when she cried. The little girl started calling her P because she couldn't pronounce Paige right. Peyton didn't correct her. Theo worked at a nearby auto shop, doing double shifts to make rent. Every night, he came back exhausted, covered in grease, but smiled like Fallon was the only thing that mattered. "You're good at this," Peyton told him one night as they sat on the curb, Fallon finally asleep inside. He shrugged. "She's all I've got." She looked at him, really looked. His jaw was sharp, his hands rough, and his eyes held too many stories. "You a single dad?" she asked softly. "Yes, her mom left when Fallon was 2. Couldn't handle the whole parenting thing." Peyton nodded. "I get it. People think fame is hard. It's nothing compared to real life. He studied her. You talk like someone who knows both. She froze. That recognition again. The way his eyes narrowed slightly, like he was putting pieces together. She stood. I should go check on her. He didn't stop her. But the next morning, when he knocked on her door, he held something in his hand. A magazine, with her face on the cover. "You're Peyton Blake," he said quietly. She stared at him, heart thudding. You lied." "I had to." Theo looked down at the magazine, then back at her. "You're the most photographed woman in the country, and you've been sitting in a motel room, taking care of my kid." "I didn't plan this." He crossed his arms. "Why are you really here?" Peyton's voice cracked. "Because I was drowning, because everyone wanted something from me and no one saw me. Not really. You did. Fallon did." There was a long pause. Then Theo said, "You should have told me." "I know." "I don't care who you are," he added, "but care that you lied." She swallowed. "Please don't shut me out." He looked at her, something soft flickering in his eyes. "I won't, but don't lie to me again." She nodded. "I won't." And somehow, that made something shift between them. That night, Fallon fell asleep in Peyton's lap while they watched cartoons. Theo watched her, his gaze lingering on the way Peyton stroked his daughter's hair. "You're not what I expected," he said quietly. "Neither are you." He leaned closer. "You ever think about starting over, somewhere no one knows your name?" "All the time." Theo reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You're not alone anymore." And just like that, something in her heart cracked open. She hadn't planned to feel anything here. She came to hide. But maybe she was meant to be found. The first time Peyton stepped outside the motel without her hoodie, the air felt different, as if the sky above this dusty stretch of nowhere finally saw her as something more than a walking scandal. She didn't know what changed. Maybe it was the way Fallon had hugged her that morning, or how Theo had looked at her like she wasn't a headline, but a person still figuring out how to stand again. It was nearly noon, and Fallon sat on the curb beside her, a paper crown made from napkins perched lopsided on her head. Peyton had folded it for her while they waited for Theo to return from the shop. Fallon leaned against her, cheeks sticky from the juice box she'd insisted on finishing in one gulp. "Do you think butterflies know they used to be caterpillars?" she asked. "I hope so," Peyton said softly. "It'd be a shame if they didn't remember how far they've come." Fallon nodded, as if that made perfect sense, and went back to drawing chalk stars on the pavement. The sound of an engine sputtering to life snapped Peyton's focus. Across the gravel lot, Theo stood beside a battered sedan, wiping his hands on a rag. He waved once, then walked over, a paper bag swinging from his wrist. "Lunch," he said, handing her the bag. "From that diner near the junction, the one with the sign that flickers like it's haunted." "You didn't have to," she said, surprised. "I know, but you've basically become Fallon's favorite person. Figured it was time I returned the favor." Peyton opened the bag and inhaled the buttery scent of grilled cheese. "This smells dangerously like comfort." "I asked the waitress what their most emotionally healing sandwich was. That's what she gave me." Fallon giggled. "Daddy, you're weird." Theo crouched beside her and tapped her nose. "Takes one to know one." Peyton watched them, a knot tightening in her chest. She didn't know what it was exactly: envy, admiration, or something more dangerous. She'd met families before in all their curated perfection, but this was different. This was real. As Fallon ran off to collect more chalk, Peyton glanced at Theo. "You always this good with her?" she asked. He sat beside her, stretching his legs out in front of him. "No, I mess up more than I get it right, but I show up. That's about all it can offer some days. That's more than most, she said, voice quieter than she intended. Theo glanced sideways. What about you? You've been here a while. What are you planning to do next? She hesitated, fingers tightening around the sandwich. I don't know. You must have had a plan when you left. I didn't, I just ran. He leaned back on his hands, eyes scanning the horizon. You know they're still talking about you. I saw a piece online, said you vanished. No one knows where you are. Good, she said without hesitation. Let them wonder. You're not scared they'll find you. I'm scared they'll bring me back before I'm ready. Theo didn't push. He never did. That was part of what unsettled her. Most people in her life had always wanted something, an opportunity, a favor, a connection. Theo just offered space. He stood after a moment, brushing gravel from his jeans. I've got a side job tonight. Some guy needs his truck fixed on site. Won't be back till late. I can stay with her, Peyton said quickly. I wasn't going to ask. I know, but I want to. He nodded once, like that settled it. That evening, Fallon insisted on building a blanket fort. Peyton helped, using chairs and towels and a broom she found near the vending machine room. They spent hours inside it, reading stories and pretending they were explorers in a jungle made of polyester and faded motel sheets. After Fallon finally drifted off, Peyton stepped outside to get some air. The stars above were clearer than she'd seen in years. She leaned against the railing, arms wrapped around herself, and tried to remember the last time she'd felt this. Unguarded. The door beside hers creaked open. Theo stepped out, face flushed and hair damp with sweat. Didn't expect you out here, he said, wiping his hands on a towel. You're back early. The guy flaked, said he'd reschedule. I didn't argue. They stood in silence for a moment, the kind that didn't feel heavy or awkward. I was thinking today, she said eventually, if I'd met you under different circumstances without the chaos, without the cameras, I don't think would have let myself talk to you. He gave a small laugh. That's supposed to be a compliment. It is, she said. I was so used to being surrounded by people who only saw the image. You never looked at me like that. I saw someone who looked like she needed air, and maybe a grilled cheese. She turned toward him. Why do you trust me with your daughter? Because the first night Fallon got sick, you held her longer than anyone else ever has. You didn't flinch. You didn't panic. You just stayed. I didn't know what else to do. You did enough. Their eyes met, the space between them suddenly charged. She should have looked away. She didn't. I'm not the kind of person who's good at staying, she whispered. I'm not the kind of person who asks people to. The screen door opened behind them. Fallon appeared, rubbing her eyes, her voice sleepy. Paige. Peyton moved quickly, brushing past Theo. I'm here, sweetheart. As she disappeared back into the room, Theo watched the door slowly click shut behind her. For the first time in years, he felt something shift in his chest, something dangerous, something like hope. And neither of them had any idea how close the outside world was to crashing back in. Peyton didn't expect to find herself in the middle of a church gymnasium 2 nights later, holding a tray of store-bought cupcakes while Fallon tugged at her sleeve with a determined look. She says you have to meet her, Fallon whispered insistently, motioning to a woman seated near the punch table. She's my teacher, and she has a really big dog. Peyton followed Fallon's gaze to a petite woman with short silver curls and a warm expression. The woman caught her eye and waved. Go on, Theo said beside her, his voice low. She's been demanding I bring Fallon to family fun night for weeks. You're officially part of the package now. I didn't realize I was getting a full social calendar, Peyton said, as Fallon dragged her forward. You're the one who said yes to glitter glue and karaoke, he called after her. She turned her head just enough to say, "You bribed me with corn dogs." Theo grinned as she walked away, and she felt it all the way to her fingertips. Inside the gym, the air was thick with the smell of popcorn and cafeteria-grade pizza. Parents milled about in small clusters, kids darted between tables with juice pouches, and someone had set up a prize wheel near the stage. Peyton had avoided places like this for years. Too many eyes, too many questions, but here, no one looked twice at her. She wasn't Peyton Blake the celebrity. She was Paige, the woman who helped with crafts and brought red velvet cupcakes in a plastic container. As Fallon introduced her to the teacher, Peyton smiled and nodded, careful to keep her voice low and her answers vague. She felt Theo's gaze from across the room and glanced back. He stood near the exit, arms crossed, watching her like he was trying to decide if he should step in or let her figure it out. She gave a small nod. "I've got this." After the introductions and a round of musical chairs that ended in Fallon's dramatic pretend collapse, Peyton slipped outside for air. The evening breeze cooled the back of her neck as she leaned against the brick wall of the church. Theo joined her a minute later, holding 2 cups of lemonade. "I figured this was safer than the punch," he said, handing her one. "Didn't trust the orange tint either," she replied, taking a sip. They stood silently for a moment, the muffled noise of children and laughter drifting through the gym doors. "She's happier," he said suddenly. Peyton looked over. "Fallon." He nodded. "She's always been a good kid, but lately, she laughs more, sleeps through the night. She hasn't done that in a long time." She didn't know what to say to that. The words settled in her chest like something permanent. "I wasn't trying to replace anyone," she said after a moment. "I know you weren't. That's what makes it real." He looked at her then, and it wasn't casual. There was weight behind it, the kind that pressed against things unspoken. Something shifted between them, unsteady and electric. "I've been offered a settlement," Theo said finally. "From Fallon's mom, she wants to sign away her rights completely." Peyton's breath caught. "What does that mean for you?" "That I'll be Fallon's legal guardian, without any strings. No more waiting to see if she shows up for birthdays or decides to contest custody." "Is that what you want?" "I want stability," he said. "For Fallon, for me, for whatever this is." He didn't have to clarify what this meant. She felt it too. He glanced down at his cup, then added, "But I'm behind on rent. Again, and I've had to turn down 2 shifts this week because Fallon's been home sick. I'm scraping the bottom of every barrel I've got." Peyton hesitated. "I can help." His head snapped up. "No. I wasn't offering charity. I was offering support." "Which I appreciate," he said, his jaw tight, "but I need to figure this out my way." "I get that, but letting someone stand beside you isn't weakness." He didn't answer, but the line of his shoulders stayed tense. Later that night, as they walked back to the motel in silence with Fallon asleep on his shoulder, Peyton felt something twist in her gut. She was falling hard, and this wasn't temporary anymore. She didn't want to leave. But she didn't belong here either. Her past wasn't going to stay hidden forever, and she knew exactly how fast the illusion of peace could shatter. The next morning, the illusion shattered. She was sitting outside with Fallon, helping her braid clover chains, when a black SUV pulled into the lot. It was too new, too polished to belong. A man stepped out, sunglasses and a camera slung over his shoulder. Peyton's blood ran cold. She rose to her feet slowly, shielding Fallon with her body. The man grinned. "There you are." Theo burst out of his room a second later, saw the man, and crossed the gravel lot in long strides. "Who the hell are you?" "I'm with Skyline Media. Just here to get a few shots, nothing invasive." "You need to leave," Theo said, stepping between them. Peyton's voice was low and deadly. "How did you find me?" The man shrugged. Someone recognized your voice at that diner near the junction, tipped us off for a few hundred. Of course they did, she muttered. Theo didn't say anything. He just stared at her, realization dawning. You knew this would happen eventually, he said. She couldn't look at him. I thought I had more time. The photographer raised his camera. Theo moved so fast the man stumbled back. You take one photo of my daughter, and I'll make sure that camera ends up in 6 different dumpsters. The man hesitated, then backed off, muttering about freedom of the press. Peyton turned to Fallon, who was now clinging to her leg, wide-eyed. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't want this for you. Theo's voice was quiet but firm. Pack your stuff. You can't stay here now. She nodded, throat tight. But when she stepped into her room and closed the door, the weight of goodbye hit her like a tidal wave. She didn't want to run again. This time, she wanted to fight. But she didn't know if Theo would let her. Peyton didn't sleep that night. She sat on the edge of the motel bed, suitcase open but untouched, Fallon's tiny hoodie still folded on top. Outside, crickets chirped in the silence, interrupted only by the occasional groan of pipes in the walls. Every sound felt louder, heavier, like the world was waiting for her to disappear again. But for the first time in her life, she didn't want to vanish. She wanted to knock on the door 2 rooms down and tell Theo everything. That she hadn't planned to fall for him, that Fallon's laugh had stitched up holes inside her she didn't know existed, and that she was terrified of losing them both. But when she opened the door, he was already standing there. His shirt was damp at the collar like he'd just run his hands through his hair. He didn't look angry. He looked tired, as though the weight of everything had finally settled on his shoulders. I didn't want you to find out like that, she said quietly. I know. I should have told you the moment I knew this was real. And when was that? He asked. She stepped out, letting the door fall shut behind her. The night Fallon fell asleep in my lap, and I realized I didn't want to miss another one. Theo's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. You don't have to forgive me, she said, but at least let me help fix what I broke. You didn't break anything, he said, voice rough. You just reminded me what it feels like to have something I don't want to lose. She couldn't breathe. He took a step closer. But this changes things. That photographer won't be the last. You're not just a person anymore. You're a storm the world follows. I know, she whispered. Fallon needs peace. Can't have cameras in her face when she's trying to learn how to write her name. I can protect her. You can't promise that. I can promise I'll do whatever it takes. He stared at her, his silence louder than anything she'd ever heard. Then he said, Fallon doesn't know yet. She thinks the man was lost and looking for directions. Peyton swallowed hard. She deserves better. So do you. She looked up, then let me prove it. Theo let out a breath and stepped back. We can't stay here anymore. I've got a friend who owns a cabin out near the lake. He said we could use it for a while. Low profile. She nodded. I'll drive us. The next morning, she packed her things, careful not to make a sound. Fallon was still asleep when they left, her face pressed to Peyton's shoulder as they carried her to Theo's car. The sun hadn't risen yet, and the sky was still painted in navy and silver. The drive was quiet, broken only by Fallon's occasional murmurs in her sleep. When they reached the cabin, it was smaller than Peyton expected, nestled between thick trees and perched just above the waterline. The lake was glassy and still, reflecting the pale blue of early daylight. Inside, the space was warm and worn. A stone fireplace stretched along one wall, a sagging couch sat opposite a small kitchen, and the back porch looked like it hadn't been swept since winter. Still, it felt safe. Theo set Fallon down in the loft bedroom, and returned to find Peyton standing in the kitchen, staring at the cracked tile countertop. "You okay?" he asked. She turned. "I used to think peace only existed on sets. When the cameras were off and the crew went home, that quiet between takes, I lived for that. And this." She looked out the window toward the lake. "This feels like I could live in the scene, not just act it." He came to stand beside her, arms folded. "I've been offered a buyout," he said suddenly. "Guy from a local garage wants to take over the shop, says he'll keep me on, higher pay, better hours." "That's good." "It is, but it's not enough." She turned to him. "What do you mean?" He hesitated. "I don't want to build a life around waiting for the next blow. I've done that since Fallon was born, scrambling, reacting, but with you here." He trailed off, then met her eyes. "I want to build something on purpose." She stepped closer. "Then let me show you what I've been building." He frowned slightly. Peyton walked over to her bag and pulled out a folder. She handed it to him. He flipped it open. Inside were pages of a proposal, a nonprofit foundation focused on giving single parents access to emergency childcare, mental health support, and legal resources. Attached were letters of intent from sponsors, lawyers, and an anonymous backer with deep pockets. "You did this," he said slowly. "I started it after Fallon got sick. Couldn't stop thinking about how many people never get help because they're too tired or too broke or too alone." Theo stared at the documents. "You built a safety net. For people like you, like Fallon, like me." He looked up, something shifting in his expression. "You didn't have to do this." "I wanted to." Fallon's voice drifted down from the loft. "Daddy, Paige." Theo glanced toward the stairs, then back at Peyton. "I should tell her the truth," she said. He nodded. "Yes, but not everything has to change because of it." They told her together that afternoon, sitting on the porch steps with the lake behind them. Fallon listened with a furrowed brow, then asked, "Does this mean we can't live in the cabin anymore?" Theo smiled. "No, Bug, we're staying right here for now." Fallon looked at Peyton. "Even if people take pictures of you?" "Even then," Peyton said. "But if they do, you can make a silly face and ruin the shot." Fallon giggled and leaned against her side. Theo watched them, his hand brushing Peyton's as he reached for hers. That night, the three of them ate dinner on the porch. Peyton had cooked, claiming she could follow a recipe if it had fewer than 6 steps. The meal was slightly burnt and wildly oversalted, but no one complained. The stars came out one by one, and Fallon fell asleep curled up in a blanket between them. Theo turned to Peyton. "You could go back if you wanted. You still have a career." "I don't want to go back," she said. "Not like before, but maybe it could build something new, something honest." He brushed a strand of hair away from her cheek. "With me." "With both of you." He leaned in, slow and certain, and kissed her. It wasn't rushed or desperate. It was the kind of kiss that came when every wall was down and every answer was yes. When they pulled apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "You saved us," he whispered. She smiled. "You saved me first." And for the first time in years, Peyton Blake wasn't hiding. She was home. Theo stood at the edge of the dock, the sun casting golden streaks across the lake as the ripples lapped gently against the worn wooden planks. Peyton sat a few feet away on a blanket, her knees drawn up, arms wrapped loosely around them. Fallon lay beside her, asleep with a book clutched to her chest, her curls tangled in the breeze. Theo turned, his voice low but sure. "I've been offered a grant." Peyton looked up. "A grant?" "From the Mechanics Union. They fund independent garages in underserved areas. Applied last month, before everything with the motel, before you." "You didn't say anything." I didn't think it would go through, but they called this morning. Said they were impressed with the proposal, especially the part about including a training program for single parents. Peyton's eyes widened. That's incredible. They want me to open a new shop just outside of town. It comes with startup funds, equipment, and a 5-year business mentorship. That's more than incredible, Theo. That's life-changing. His gaze dropped momentarily to Fallon, then lifted again, meeting hers. But it's a lot. It means staying in one place, putting down roots. She didn't hesitate. Then let's do it. Theo blinked. Let's. I want to be where you are, where she is. If you're building something, I want to help. He took a slow step toward her. You sure? It's not glamorous. It's long hours and busted knuckles and people who don't care who you used to be. That's exactly why I want it. I don't need red carpets. I need something real, and I've never been more sure of anything. Theo crouched beside her, brushing his fingers along her cheek, his voice softer than before. You're different now. So are you. He looked down at Fallon, her small chest rising and falling with even breaths. She needs stability, a home, something permanent. I can give her that, we can. He leaned in, kissed her gently, then pulled back with a small, unguarded breath. They're sending the paperwork next week. I'll need to sign and start planning the build. I'll help you with the branding, she said. You're going to need a name, something that stands out on flyers and t-shirts. He laughed under his breath. You think I'm printing t-shirts? You're running a business. You're going to need merchandise and a website and probably a better haircut. He nodded slowly. I like this version of us. We're not versions anymore, she said. We're just us. Later that evening, as Fallon chased fireflies with a mason jar in the backyard, Peyton opened her laptop and sat beside Theo on the porch swing. She pulled up the final draft of the nonprofit's launch page. The board approved everything, she said. We're ready to go live. You sure you want your name attached to it? I want it front and center. This isn't about hiding anymore. It's about using what I've got to help people who don't have it. Theo looked at the screen, then at her. You've changed more lives in 2 months than most people do in a lifetime. She reached for his hand. I'm just getting started. The next morning, Fallon stood barefoot on the cabin's porch, holding a paper she'd scribbled on with a crayon. What's this? Theo asked, crouching to her level. It's our house, she said proudly. You, me, and Paige. I even drew the dog we're gonna get. Peyton raised an eyebrow. Dog. Fallon nodded. He's big and drooly and needs a yard. Theo gave Peyton a pointed look. We may have to upgrade from the cabin. I'm fine with a yard, as long as I get to pick the curtains. And the dog. Fallon grinned, obviously. 3 weeks later, they moved into a modest, sunlit house on the outskirts of town. Theo's garage opened across the street, a giant banner hanging above the bay doors that read, Fallon's Garage Fixing Cars, Fueling Futures. Peyton stood beside him on opening day, dressed in a fitted navy jumpsuit and holding a clipboard, directing volunteers and organizing press kits for the local paper. She didn't hide from the cameras now. If someone recognized her, they didn't say anything. And if they did, she didn't care. Fallon ran around the lot, handing out lemonade in paper cups and introducing herself as the boss. That night, after the ribbon cutting and the last guest left, Peyton walked into the darkened garage and found Theo standing beside the lift, running his hand along the shiny new toolbox. She wrapped her arms around him from behind. He turned, pulling her close. We built this. You built it. He shook his head, not without you. She looked up. We're not running anymore. No, he said, we're not. He kissed her then, slow and certain, the kind of kiss that didn't ask permission because it already had everything it needed. She smiled against his mouth. They locked up the shop and walked home under a sky full of stars, Fallon asleep in Peyton's arms, her paper crown still perched on her head. 1 year later, Peyton stood in the renovated community center downtown, her heels clicking softly on the polished floor. The nonprofit had expanded to 3 cities, and tonight was the gala to honor the families they'd helped. Theo arrived late, covered in sawdust from the workbench he'd been building for the after-school program. He wore a suit, but his tie was crooked, and Peyton straightened it as he stepped into the room. Fallon ran across the floor in a blue satin dress, crashing into him with a squeal. He scooped her up and spun her once before setting her down. "You nervous?" he asked Peyton. She took a breath. Not anymore. He offered his arm, then let's go change the world. Hand in hand, they stepped onto the stage to thunderous applause. And for once, the spotlight didn't feel like pressure. It felt like home.